Hello, everyone. My name is Gaurav Seth. I'm a product manager on Azure App Services team, and I'm pretty much responsible for all the migration tooling to Azure App Service, stuff around resiliency, scaling, backups, to name few of the features that I work as part of this team. Now, let's start by getting into the context by understanding why should I even migrate to Azure. So let's understand that Azure as a cloud platform supports all approaches and business priorities. Now, if it's your priority to have greater control over your application and infrastructure, I mean, obviously you can migrate your web applications and database and all other dependencies to a virtual machine. That's what we call as infrastructure as a service. Now, as you keep shifting rightwards, I mean, uh, what starts happening is you start relinquishing some of the control in lieu of simplicity. So now, where our focus is going to be for next 25 odd minutes is around platform as a service. So the idea for platform as a service is that you as a developer, you as an architect, basically offload the entire infrastructure and the operating system management to the Azure App Service team. That's us. While you purely focus on your app and data, largely in this case app, because that's what you host on Azure App Service. Now, how does the Azure platform as a service, or how does Azure App Service in general help? I mean, obviously, we help you with unblocking innovation. So the idea here is that we are living in a world where we keep delivering on new versions of our application, and we need a platform that can actually support the pace of releases that you wish to, and that's exactly what Azure App Services is built for. So we have I can say pretty deep integration with all of the most popular CI/CD platforms. You can use things like deployment slots. So basically, you can deploy two slots and then do a swap. So again, I mean, we have all the features inbuilt for you to support innovation, support quick releases, support versioning, whatnot, optimize costs. Now, again, when we talk about optimizing costs, it's a lot to do with that what I said in the beginning, that you basically leave the entire management and operations of the platform to us, while you focus on your application, you focus on your code, and that is where the cost optimization also comes in. And integrated security. So again, I mean, Azure App Service as a platform allows you, uh, I mean, authentication, enter ID, for example. I mean, not only Android, you can configure authentication authorization with some of the most popular other authentication mechanisms as well. I mean, you could isolate your application using virtual networks, subnets, whatnot. So I mean, again, we have, and not to forget the whole defender for cloud. So yeah, I mean, we have all the integration built in when it comes to various security features for your apps deployed to Azure App Service. Now, before we get any further, it's also important to understand some of the core differentiating features that Azure App Service as a platform has to offer. As I said, it's a highly managed platform. So basically, by highly managed, what we mean here is we basically take care of the entire patching of the operating system and the runtime. We provide you 99.95% SLA even on a single instance. I mean, again, the platform is built with entire focus on CI/CD and scaling. Scaling is again a core feature for any app platform, and we have multiple ways that you can do scaling. I mean, you could do scaling based on rules, you could do scaling based on a schedule, you can even do automatic scaling, something that I will briefly talk about as we move forward. Now, with that, let's shift the focus to What if I have existing web applications in my on-prem data center and I want to migrate those to Azure App Service? Now, we basically over past couple of years, Azure App Services engineering team has been investing significantly into delivering tools which simplify the entire migration journey for your existing web application. And again, if you are looking at migrating your applications at a scale of where you have multiple virtual machines, you have hundreds of IS servers. I mean, we're talking about a really, really large scale, or perhaps a data center scoped migration. That is where you look at the Azure Migrate .NET Web Application migration to app service. Like, it's an integrated experience built in within the whole Azure Migrate experience, and we support discovery of .NET and Java Tomcat web applications. Now, these web applications could be deployed to VMware, Hyper-V, or even physical servers. Once you've done the discovery, we also let you do a large scale or a bulk assessment of .NET web applications which are deployed to VMware, Hyper-V, or again physical servers. And obviously, the last logical step is to let you do a bulk migration, and we do let you do a bulk migration for your .NET web applications to Azure App Services, which are hosted on VMware environment. Now, that's about the entire data center or at a large scale migration scenarios. What if you just want to migrate out of a single IS web servers, basically of multiple web applications which are hosted on a single IS server? That is where you look at using the PowerShell scripts. Now, again, in terms of PowerShell scripts, we let you discover multiple web applications on the server. And because these are PowerShell scripts, you could deploy them to VMware, Hyper-V, physical server VMs. I mean, these are just scripts, and this is exactly the demo that I am going to showcase in a little while from now. And not only discovery and assessment, we also let you migrate using the PowerShell scripts. Now, there is another important use case for PowerShell scripts. If you are in an environment where your application server perhaps is behind multiple layers of security, and you may not even have internet access, in such a scenario, you could basically look at a online offline hybrid kind of a scenario with PowerShell script. So the idea there is that you discover, assess, and package your web applications on a VM. You copy the package, which is like content and config, over to a VM which has internet access, and then you can run the migration from there. So yeah, that's absolutely possible. Now, if you are in a scenario where you have your web applications hosted as part of web roles, I mean, yes, of course, you can also use PowerShell scripts to migrate your applications out of a web role to Azure App Service. Or if you are on an Azure VM already, you can again use PowerShell scripts to migrate your .NET web applications from an Azure VM over to Azure App Service. Similarly, uh, we also have a, a graphical interface, basically, and this is more like for a single web application migration. So as you can see, we have multiple different tools. They pretty much do the same thing in terms of how they are configured to run different configuration based checks. And just to be clear, we run approximately 13 configuration checks behind the scene. And when we say configuration checks, they focus about what ports your applications are currently hosted on. Are you using any database connection string? Are you using any modules? Are you using any ICPI filters? What sort of authentication is configured, to name a few. Now, all of the tools use the same configuration checks, but again, the idea is that we have built these tools, or rather different tools, for different scopes and different purposes. Now, yesterday at Ignite, we also announced Azure Migrate application analysis, code analysis toolkit for .NET. I mean, for Java, it was already in preview. We have also announced it for .NET. So idea here is that while the Azure Migrate or the PowerShell scripts let you do a discovery and assessment based on configuration, what if you also want to look into your code? Because obviously, I mean, configuration is just one part of your migration journey, but it's also the code. So now you can analyze your codes being inside Visual Studio. We give you a summary result in terms of what you need to fix before you migrate your web application. So basically, a combination of the configuration based checks and the deep or the deep dive analysis of your code ensures that you have a much higher degree of success when you start migration of your web applications to Azure App Service. And again, that's a demo that I'm going to showcase today. So let's move over to our demo. So before I get into the demo, so the idea is that all the PowerShell scripts that I'm going to use for the demo are available for download from here. So you can just come to this page and you can go ahead and I have the link in the resources slide. So yes, you can get this script right from here. And if you want to download the Azure Migrate application analysis code analysis toolkit, this is the location that you can download, or at this points you to the extension. Remember, it's a Visual Studio extension available from Visual Studio Marketplace as well. So let's get into the demo. So the idea here basically is that we need to start our demo by discovering and assessing the web applications which are hosted on this local IS server. And again, the web applications that hosted on this IS server is a very simple eShop catalog manager application. So now again, the idea here is that this is a web application which is hosted on my local IS server. I need to migrate this web application over to Azure App Service. Now, let's go ahead and run this PowerShell script. Now, what's happening here is that the scripts have discovered two web applications which are hosted on the local server. Now, for if you see for the first default web application, we are seeing a warning. Now, again, there are no errors being reported, thankfully, but what's happening is we have a warning that there is a database connection string that was discovered or assessed as part of the web.config. Now, what that means is that while the scripts will help you migrate your application over to Azure App Service, you also need to make sure that either you migrate your database over to a compatible or a relevant Azure database service, or you have connectivity if you are still keeping your database on-prem. So you have connectivity configured between the app and the database. Now, similarly, if you see for the second web application, we are getting a warning around TCP port check. So now this is yet another very common scenario where uh, you may have multiple web applications on a single IS server, and not all web applications would be on port 80 or 443. Now, what that means is that even this web application would migrate just fine to Azure App Service. But remember, on Azure App Service, the traffic is available only over port 80 and 443. So now, if you have any integrations, any backend integrations with any APIs or whatever, I mean, you need to make sure that you do make configuration checks or configuration fixes once you are done with the migration. So those are as I said earlier, those are the kind of configuration checks that we perform using these PowerShell scripts. Now, once we are done with this configuration checks, let's go ahead and dig deep into the code. Now, this is a classic ASP.NET application sitting inside Visual Studio. Now, if I want to analyze the code, it's very simple. I just right click and say re-platform to Azure. And this basically goes ahead and loads the extension. I say I want to create a new report. And now I select the project. If you have multiple projects, you may select all the projects, or you may select a single project to analyze the code. Now, what happens here is that you can say that I just want to either analyze only the source code and settings, or if you have any binary dependencies, you can select that as well and click on analyze. Now, within a matter of seconds, basically we'll give you this nice summary. So what basically we are telling you here is that there are 16 issues There are 227 incidents. I mean, so basically we're trying to give you a breakup of issues, incidents, and story points. Now let's see deeper into some of this, and let me try and zoom this so you can see the kind of uh, so what we do again as part of this code analysis toolkit is we give you issues which are potential, optional, and mandatory. Now, uh, mandatory issues are ideally the ones that you should be fixing before you migrate your web application. I would, and potential and optional pretty much means that they may cause an issue post migration, and if you have the resources, and if you have, I mean, it completely depends on the way your migration journey is progressing, that you would even want to fix the potential issues. So if I go look at um, one of the issues right here, which is around Windows authentication, or if I look at some of the, so let me zoom again. So what this is telling me is that I'm using log for net.dll. That's basically writing my logs to a local file share. Now, again, in Azure App Service, you can do logging. There are many different ways. You can do Azure monitoring. You can write to a log analytics workspace. You can write to using Azure App Services inbuilt logging mechanism. You can write to a blob store. You can write to file share. So there are many different ways that you can handle logging. But if you're still trying to log, I mean, exactly the way that you were doing on-prem, probably you might land up into error. So yeah, that's the kind of analysis that we run as part of this toolkit, and we give you recommendations. Now, what I've done is I basically created another repo and I fixed some of the issues. And just to let showcase that, let me go ahead and run the same tool, assuming that I fix some of the issues over here. Once I click analyze, if you see the number of issues, which are 16, are now down to 8. So basically, the idea here is that you have done the configuration checks, you have run the whole Azure Migrate code analysis toolkit onto your source code and binaries, and we have come back and given you a list of mandatory, potential, and optional code fixes that you should be doing. And now you have gone ahead and done the fixes. So the final step in your journey is to go ahead and basically run the actual migration. Now, what this script does basically, and what I've done for the sake of demo, I've kind of created wrapper around the scripts. But when you download the actual zip file, you would see you would like see different scripts that you need to run in a sequence, and we have very rich documentation available to help you do that. Now, behind the scene, what we do here is we create the app service plan. We create the Azure App Service web app, and then we do a zip deploy of the packaged content and config over to Azure App Service. In the interest of time, I mean, I already migrated one of the web application, and that's how it looks like. I can go ahead and browse. Now, if you see, interestingly, post migration, I'm experiencing a bit of a delay. I'm seeing some sort of a slowness into my web application. Now, that is where the power of Azure App Service as a platform comes into picture. Now we have this whole diagnose and solve problem experience over here. Now, basically, what it does is it gives you behind the scene. Okay, these are some of the things that you could do to improve the operability or reduce the risk exposure for your web app. So yeah, that's there. If I think that my web application is being slow, I can go deep into web app slow. So basically, again, behind the scene, we will keep getting data about web app being slow. And if you can see that we already have data that yes, there is behind the scene, I mean, our platform. And again, we are using a lot of AI driven analysis behind the scene to come up with some of these things. And in fact, you can also, so this is one way of reaching here. You can also use the recently announced Azure Copilot experience. I mean, I could also do a same kind of I just say web apps low, it will again point me to the same detectors as I just showed you how to reach or how to navigate using uh, the whole diagnose and solve problem experience. So as you can see, it directly takes you to this pretty much the same location. So yes, I mean you could either use Azure Copilot experience, or you could click around and use the diagnose and solve problem experience. But eventually, I mean we are using behind the scene, we are using a lot of AI based intelligence. I mean to go ahead and give you some of these analysis. Now, if I go back and now, once I've done migration, there are a lot of important features that Azure App Service as a platform provides that I can go ahead and use here. I can simply go ahead and set up scaling. Now, I could either do a manual scale, I could do a rule based scaling, which is basically if my CPU usage is beyond 80%, give me few more instances, one or more. Or I can even do an automatic scaling where I just define the maximum bound. If I click automatic scaling, basically what happens here is I can define the maximum burst for the app service plan, and then I can also go ahead and define what is the max and minimum for each of my individual web applications. So yes, I mean, these are things which are available, right? Or these are capabilities available straight out of the platform. I mean, you don't have to really make a code change to use scaling options. Similarly, you could use custom domains, certificates. You can easily configure authentication if you want to further secure your environment variables and configuration settings. Again, we have deep inbuilt experience with Azure Key Vault. So yeah, I mean these are all the key capabilities that the platform provides you. Now let me head back to my deck and let me go back to the presentation mode. Now here is some of the, I should say, guidance that I wanted to share today based on my experience working with multiple different customers, developer audience, in terms of when we actually start the whole migration flow. What are some of the uh, things that you need, some of the issues that you need to be aware of, some of the things that you can do? And I have written a pretty detailed blog which is available on Tech Community. Again, I have the link to that uh, in my resources slide. Things around database, as you said, as you already saw, that one of the assessment checks was around the whole database. So if you are migrating your app, make sure the database is reachable. Another thing is around authentication. Now it is again very common for you to use integrated Windows auth with your web application. I mean, in Azure App Service, you can obviously use Entra ID as your authentication provider. You can even do an authentication from a web app all the way back to your database. That's there. If you are using a file system or a file server with a web application, again we have the whole um, capability within Azure App Service today where you can mount an Azure file share as a local network share and then keep downloading or uploading content to these file shares. I mean, caching, yes, if your web application is using caching for scaling operations, or for extensibility and being stateless, yes, I mean, that's all available. You can use Azure Redis Cache. Secrets management, I just mentioned, you can use Azure Key Vault. So the idea here that I'm trying to focus is that they these are the sort of things that you were doing on-prem with a web application. We already have these services and features available within Azure App Services and within multiple different services of Azure that you can continue to perform the same task and activities with your app. So take for example session state. Yes, I mean you can obviously do a session management with I would ideally say you should try and externalize your session management because that's where you get to use the true power of scaling with your applications. Yes, few more things to be aware of on Azure App Service. We only support HTTP based protocols, HTTP, HTTPS. If an application is running on non HTTP protocols, obviously you will, that's not something that you can host on Azure App Service. And moving away from the application side of the things, when it comes to operational considerations, again, how do I logging? How do I do logging? How do I do telemetry? So again, for telemetry and APM example, we have a very deep or inbuilt integration with Azure App Insights, CI/CD, of course, GitHub, Azure pipelines. I mean, we have very deep integration with them as well. Debugging techniques, you can do even a remote debugging with Visual Studio itself. Logging, you can do log analytics. We have Azure Monitor. I mean, the idea here is that the features are all available, and these are available straight out of the Azure App Service as a platform. And that's the benefit, and that is why you should be looking at moving your .NET web applications from on-prem data centers or on-prem IS servers to Azure App Service. And finally, if there are still requirements that, for example, you have applications with dependencies. For example, you need some kind of a custom OS dependency, or you have a custom DLL dependency. I mean, you could look at hosting your web applications within Windows containers on Azure App Service. Now, I mean, so that gives you further more flexibility. It's like if you have a organizational policy where you just want to migrate everything to containers, yes, you can do that with Windows containers and Azure App Service. If you have applications which have dependencies, or if you're migrating from just want to migrate from on-prem to PaaS, or if you want to use some relaxed security restrictions, because remember, Azure App Service runs in its own sandbox environment. Yeah, I mean, these are all different reasons where you could even evaluate Windows containers on Azure App Service for migrating your .NET web applications over. And finally, these are some of the resources that I was mentioning. So if you want to read about in depth about the migration checklist and guidance, I mean, that's my blog on Tech Community. And if you want to go ahead and download the App Service Migration Tools, that is the link that you can go ahead and download the tools. So with that, let me see if there are any questions.
Hey there, Gaurav. All right. Thank you so much. There's so many things for us to learn about App Service. I'm going to have to go back and go over some of that again, because even though I know the things that I use and deploy and
Sure.
insert into App Service, there's always some other piece of it to learn. I think about it like Excel. Everybody only knows 20% of Excel, and we each know a different 20%. I feel like it's the same thing with App Service. We all know about 20% of App Service, and there's so much more you can do with it.
I completely agree. And that's the reason, as an app services engineering team, we continue to invest in the platform, and we want to make it more and more like, easier for our customers to go ahead and deploy the web application on a tool and a platform or a language of their choice. So yes, I completely agree. And that's the reason you will keep seeing innovations lighting up, newer features lighting up on the entire Azure App Service stack.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the event. Take care, Gaurav, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. Bye.